The
How
room was
dare you
tense,
show your
and the
face
air
here
felt
after
thick
what
with
you
disdain.
did? Get out of this house
The grand
right
dining
now!
room, with its towering windows and polished marble floors, suddenly seemed suffocating. The family had just finished their lavish dinner, and everyone had gathered around, discussing their day and sipping their expensive wine. But then, the sharp voice of Veronica Beckett, the mother of the billionaire, cut through the chatter. "What is this?" she said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the black maid, Maya, standing near the door, silently waiting to clear the dishes. Veronica's gaze lingered on Maya's uniform, the neat white apron and black dress that were so often a reminder of her place. "This uniform is filthy," Veronica continued, her voice laced with contempt. "How dare you show up here like this, looking unkempt? Can't you do anything right?" The room fell silent, every eye turning toward Maya, as if waiting for her to break. Maya stood still, her hands gently clasped in front of her, her gaze lowered to the floor, trying to hide the mix of embarrassment and anger that threatened to surface. But her heart was racing. Veronica's words stung, but they were nothing new. She had been humiliated before by people who thought they were better than her, but this time, it was different. Something about this moment made Maya feel like she was standing on the edge of a turning point. Maya's fingers tightened around the handle of the tray she was holding, her knuckles white. The other guests, all of them influential figures in the business world, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances. No one spoke. They all knew the rules when Veronica spoke. Everyone listened. But no one had expected this. Maya, the black maid, was being publicly berated by the mother of the billionaire who had hired her. The humiliation was palpable. Veronica, now fully focused on Maya, took a few steps forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She raised her chin, a look of superiority on her face. "I've had enough of this. You're dismissed for the night. I don't want to see you in here again, until you can properly serve." The words were final, meant to crush any ounce of pride Maya might have had left. But Maya did not move. She didn't flinch. She stood her ground. Veronica's words had no power over her anymore. For a moment, the room felt frozen, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Everyone waited for Maya to apologize, to bow her head and scurry away like she always did. But something inside her had changed. Maya slowly raised her head, meeting Veronica's gaze. "I am not the one who is unkempt here," she said, her voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. Veronica blinked, caught off guard by Maya's calm response. She was used to people cowering, to people accepting their place without question. But Maya was different. "Excuse me?" Veronica sneered, her eyes narrowing. Maya's voice did not waver. "I have worked here for months, and you've never once taken the time to learn my name or even ask how I'm doing. You think I'm just here to serve, but I am more than that. I have a voice, and I will not be silenced any longer." Veronica's eyes widened for a split second, disbelief flashing across her face. No one had ever spoken to her like this. She opened her mouth, but the words failed her. The other guests, who had been nervously watching, now exchanged uneasy glances. The room was still, the silence suffocating, as they all waited for the billionaire to intervene. But he did not. Maya stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She was ready for whatever was to come next. The power had shifted, the game had changed. The room was eerily quiet, the tension so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Maya stood her ground, her posture unyielding, her eyes never leaving Veronica's. For a moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. The other guests in the room shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond to what had just transpired. Veronica, the mother of the billionaire, was not accustomed to being spoken to in such a manner, especially not by someone in a position like Maya's. She opened her mouth to speak, but for once, words failed her. Her eyes narrowed, her face flushed with anger, and yet there was something else, a flicker of hesitation. Was it doubt? Or was it disbelief at the fact that Maya, of all people, had dared to challenge her? Veronica was used to people shrinking in her presence, afraid to speak up, but Maya was different. Maya was standing there, calm and composed, despite the verbal assault that had just been launched at her. "Do you think you can just walk away from this?" Veronica spat, her voice shaking with fury. "You think you can stand there and lecture me about respect?" Maya didn't flinch. She stood still, her hands at her sides, fingers slightly clenched, but her face was a picture of quiet strength. "I'm not lecturing you," she replied softly, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm simply telling you the truth. You've disrespected me for months, treating me like I don't matter. But I matter. I have a voice, and I will use it." The silence in the room was deafening. Not a single person moved. The guests, once casually sipping their wine and enjoying the evening, now sat frozen, watching this unexpected exchange unfold before them. Veronica's jaw clenched, and for the first time, she looked unsure. She had always prided herself on her ability to control every situation, but this time, she was losing her grip. She glanced around the room, as if hoping someone would speak up, intervene, do something to stop this madness. But no one did. Maya's words had a power all their own. They lingered in the air, like an unspoken challenge. "You can fire me if you want," Maya continued, her voice steady, but the determination behind it was clear. "You can kick me out of here, but you cannot erase who I am. You cannot take away my dignity." Veronica opened her mouth again, but this time, she didn't know what to say. Her usual sharp retort caught in her throat, and for the briefest moment, she found herself looking at Maya not with disdain, but with a hint of something else, something she wasn't quite ready to admit. Respect? Maybe. Maya's calm strength had taken Veronica by surprise, and for the first time, she wondered if she had underestimated this woman in front of her. Veronica took a deep breath and slowly sat down, her eyes never leaving Maya. The room remained silent, the air thick with unspoken tension. It was as though everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice broke the silence. It was Jackson Beckett, the billionaire's son. He had been sitting quietly, watching the exchange unfold, but now he stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Enough, Mom," he said, his voice firm. All eyes turned toward him. Jackson, the man who had everything: money, power, influence, was speaking up. "Maya is right." Veronica's eyes widened, her face reddening with a mix of anger and shock. She had never expected her son to side with someone like Maya. "What are you saying?" she demanded, her voice cold. "You're taking her side?" Jackson met his mother's gaze, his eyes unwavering. "Yes, I am, because what you just did was wrong. Maya has been nothing but professional and kind, and you treated her like she was invisible. You're not going to treat her like that anymore, Mom." The shock in the room was palpable. No one had ever seen Jackson speak to his mother this way before. Veronica's expression faltered for a moment, the harshness on her face melting into something softer, perhaps regret. Jackson turned to Maya, his gaze softening. "I apologize for my mother's behavior. You deserve better than that." Maya was stunned. This wasn't the apology she had expected, but it was an apology nonetheless. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips, though her eyes remained steady. "Thank you," she said quietly. Veronica stood up abruptly, her face a mask of fury. "This is unacceptable," she muttered, storming out of the room. As the door slammed behind her, the tension in the room seemed to dissipate, but it was clear that something had shifted. Maya had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had not only changed the course of the evening but had also forced those around her to confront their own biases and behavior. Jackson turned back to the guests, his face still serious. "This is a wake-up call for all of us," he said. "We need to do better, all of us." The room, once filled with the hum of idle chatter, now fell into a thoughtful silence. Jackson Beckett had spoken, and his words carried weight. Maya had not only gained the respect of the people in that room but had also set in motion a change that none of them would forget anytime soon. The following day, the tension in the house was palpable. Maya had spent the night thinking over what had happened, replaying every word and every glance in her mind. She had never imagined that a single confrontation could have such a ripple effect. For years, she had kept her head down, endured the slights, the humiliations, and the dismissals that came with being someone who was not seen as worthy. But something had shifted. Something inside her had changed, and she wasn't the same woman she was yesterday. Her heart still raced when she thought about standing up to Veronica, but now there was a sense of calm confidence in her that she had never known before. Meanwhile, in the grand dining room, Jackson sat alone, the weight of the previous night's events pressing down on him. He couldn't stop thinking about how things had unfolded. He had always admired his mother, her strength, her resolve, but last night had shaken him to his core. He had seen a side of her that he hadn't known existed, the side that believed she could humiliate others without consequence. And then there was Maya. He had never truly noticed her before. Just another part of the help. Another face that faded into the background. But last night, when she had spoken up, he had seen something in her that he had never seen in anyone else, a quiet strength, a dignity that demanded respect. Jackson ran his fingers through his hair, thinking. He knew that things couldn't go back to the way they were. Maya had proven that. He couldn't just ignore what he had seen. He couldn't pretend that the status quo was acceptable anymore. As he walked through the hallway, heading toward the study, he passed his mother's office door. He hesitated for a moment, his hand on the knob, before pushing it open. Veronica sat at her desk, flipping through papers, the usual coldness in her demeanor. But when she looked up and saw Jackson standing there, she raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" she asked, her voice clipped. Jackson didn't waste any time. "We need to talk," he said, walking into the room and closing the door behind him. Veronica looked at him with surprise, but didn't respond. "You know, what you did last night, it wasn't right," Jackson said, his voice firm, but not without a trace of disappointment. "You humiliated Maya in front of everyone. And for what? Just because she's the help?" Veronica leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "She needed to be put in her place," she said, her voice defensive. "She had no right to speak to me like that." Jackson felt his blood begin to boil. "She had every right," he said, stepping closer to the desk. "You've treated her like she's invisible, like she doesn't matter. But she does. She's a person, and you need to start seeing her that way." Veronica's face hardened, but Jackson didn't back down. "I'm not going to sit by and watch this continue," he said, his tone final. "We're going to make things right." For a moment, there was silence. Veronica looked at her son, a flicker of something passing across her face, regret, maybe, or realization. Jackson didn't wait for her to respond. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving his mother to her thoughts. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this moment slip away. Maya had changed the game, and now it was his turn to act. That afternoon, Jackson called Maya into his office. When she walked in, he was sitting at his desk, looking at the documents in front of him. Maya hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice steady. Jackson looked up at her, a hint of a smile on his face. "Yes, Maya, I wanted to apologize. For everything," he said, his voice sincere. Maya's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't speak. "I was wrong. About everything," Jackson continued. "I never took the time to see you for who you really are. But after last night, I get it now. You deserve better. You deserve respect." Maya stood silently, processing his words. She had never expected an apology, least of all from someone like him. But there it was, and it caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson stood up, walking around his desk to face her. "I want to make it right," he said. "I know I can't undo what's been done. But I can start by treating you with the respect you deserve, and I promise, this will never happen again." Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable, but inside, a small seed of hope began to take root. Maybe things were starting to change. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally breathe again. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. As she turned to leave, Jackson spoke again. "Maya, I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, but I'm seeing you now, and that's what matters." Maya nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was different. It wasn't the usual tension that had been the norm, but something else, an air of anticipation, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Maya had woken up early, as she always did, to prepare for the day ahead. The events of the previous evening were still fresh in her mind, but she tried to push them aside, focusing on her work. She couldn't afford to dwell on what had happened. After all, She had no idea what Jackson's apology meant for her future. Was it genuine, or was it just an attempt to appease the situation? She didn't know, and she wasn't sure she was ready to find out. As Maya walked through the house, carrying a tray of breakfast to the dining room, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her actions the night before. She had stood up for herself, something she had never done before, and it had changed everything. But now, as she moved about the house, she was hyper-aware of the gazes of the staff and the occasional glance from the guests. Everyone was watching her, and she couldn't help but feel that the dynamics had shifted. They all knew what had happened. They all knew that the invisible lines had been crossed, and for better or worse, she was no longer just the maid. When she entered the dining room, Jackson was already sitting at the head of the table, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up when she entered, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. Maya had to fight the urge to look away. It was a strange feeling, to be seen so clearly, to be acknowledged in a way she hadn't been before. "Good morning, Maya," Jackson said, his voice warm and inviting. Maya nodded in return but said nothing, unsure of how to respond. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he continued, setting the papers down on the table. "Please, have a seat." Maya hesitated. This was new territory for her. She had never been invited to sit at the table before, never been given this kind of respect. But now, she found herself standing there, unsure of what to do. After a moment, she set the tray down on the side table and took a seat across from him, still unsure of what to expect. Jackson leaned forward, his tone serious but kind. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last night," he said, "and I want to make sure that this kind of thing never happens again. You shouldn't have been treated like that. No one should." Maya looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected an apology, but hearing the sincerity in his voice made her feel something else entirely, something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "You're not just some servant," Jackson continued, his voice soft but firm. "You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, like any other person, and I'm going to make sure that happens." Maya blinked, surprised by his words. She had never expected this. She had always believed that the people who hired her, the ones with power and wealth, would never see her as anything more than a tool to be used. But Jackson was different. He was offering her something she had never been given before: respect. "I know it's not enough to just say these things," he continued, "but I want to show you that I mean it. I'm going to make some changes around here. For everyone." Maya sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. She wasn't sure how to respond. This was all so overwhelming, so foreign to her. She had never been in a position like this before. "I don't know what to say," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," Jackson replied with a small smile. "I just want you to know that things are different now." Maya looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Could this really be happening? Could someone like Jackson actually care about someone like her? It was a question she had never asked herself before, because deep down, she had never thought it was possible. But now, as she sat there, looking at him, she started to wonder if things might just be different. If she might finally have a chance at something better. As the conversation continued, the morning light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. The weight that had been hanging over Maya's shoulders for so long seemed to lift, if only for a moment. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. That maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in this world beyond the walls of the mansion, beyond the limitations that had been placed on her. When their conversation finally came to an end, Jackson stood and walked over to the door. "I'll have my assistant schedule a meeting with you," he said, his tone still kind. "We'll talk about what comes next." Maya nodded, standing as well. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew that for the first time, she had a choice. And that was more than she had ever hoped for. The following week, things were still settling down in the house. Maya had started noticing small changes. Jackson had kept his word. He had made it clear to the rest of the staff that things were going to be different. The servants were no longer expected to keep their heads down, avoid eye contact, or simply obey without question. Maya's interactions with the other staff had started to change as well. They treated her with a newfound respect, no longer seeing her as just another part of the background. It was a quiet shift, but it was there. Maya herself had also started to feel a change within. The confidence Jackson had helped her find had begun to bloom, and she was learning to carry herself differently. For the first time in years, she felt like her voice mattered. She could hold her head high. As she walked through the hallways, she noticed people smiling at her, nodding in acknowledgment, even offering small pleasantries. It was as if the entire atmosphere of the house had lightened. There was no longer the oppressive weight of silent judgment hanging over her. But even with these changes, the hardest part was still ahead of her. The real test wasn't just about being treated with respect, it was about making sure that the respect would last, that it wouldn't just be a passing gesture. She couldn't afford to let down her guard, not yet. One afternoon, as Maya was cleaning the library, she overheard a conversation in the next room. It was Jackson speaking to one of the executives who had been in the room the night of the confrontation. "She's not just a maid, she's a person," Jackson was saying. "And I need you to start seeing her that way. No more belittling. No more acting like she's invisible." The executive, a tall man in a tailored suit, was silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. "Jackson, I'm not sure what you're trying to do here, but this is a business, not a charity," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "I don't know how you expect us to work with her." Maya froze, the dusting cloth in her hand stilling. She could feel the familiar sting of old wounds reopening, the same feeling of being nothing more than a servant, a background character in someone else's story. But Jackson's response was swift and firm. "If you can't treat her with the respect she deserves, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here," he said, his voice unwavering. "She's just as important as any one of us, and I won't tolerate anyone making her feel less than that." Maya stood there, stunned. She hadn't expected to hear those words, but hearing Jackson stand up for her, truly stand up for her, was something she had never imagined. For a moment, she felt a rush of gratitude and disbelief. She had spent so many years being dismissed, overlooked, and now someone who had the power to change things was not only seeing her, but defending her. The conversation continued, but Maya barely heard the rest of it. Her mind was spinning with the realization that Jackson wasn't just talking a good game, he was taking action. As the executive left the room, Jackson paused for a moment and looked in Maya's direction. He hadn't seen her, but Maya stepped out from behind the shelf, catching his eye. She was still unsure of how to thank him. What could she say? Words seemed so small compared to what he had done for her. Jackson offered a small, almost shy smile. "I hope that makes things clearer," he said. Maya nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "It does," she whispered, barely able to keep the tears at bay. "Thank you." Jackson nodded back, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "You deserve it." As the days went on, Maya found herself grappling with a new kind of fear, a fear of hope. She had always believed that nothing would ever change, that she would forever be trapped in the same role, treated as invisible, as disposable. But now, with each passing day, the walls around her were slowly crumbling. There was a chance, a small, fragile chance, that things could be different, not just for her, but for everyone who had been treated the same way. Maya wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer going to hide. She was no longer going to let anyone define her by their assumptions. She was ready to stand in the light, to let her voice be heard. And as the sun began to set that evening, casting a golden glow over the mansion, Maya stood at the window, looking out at the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that the future might just be brighter than she had ever imagined. Days passed, and Maya found herself settling into a new rhythm. The respect she had earned wasn't just from Jackson anymore. The entire household had begun to shift, slowly but surely, as Jackson's example rippled out to the staff and the guests who came and went. Maya had always believed that she was invisible, but now she could walk through the halls with her head held high, not just as someone serving drinks or cleaning up after others, but as someone who was seen, who mattered. But despite the progress, there was a nagging fear in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that this might all be temporary. Would the respect last? Would things really change? Or was this just a fleeting moment of kindness from Jackson that would eventually fade into nothing? As much as she wanted to believe in the changes happening around her, a part of her couldn't let go of the past, the years of being treated as less than. It was hard to imagine a life where she was seen as equal, not just to Jackson, but to everyone else. One afternoon, as Maya was walking down the long corridor to the kitchen, she saw something that made her pause. Veronica, the billionaire's mother, was standing near the door of the library, talking with one of the other high-ranking guests. Her back was to Maya, and for a moment, Maya thought about turning around and walking in the other direction. But something inside her urged her forward. She had every right to be here, just like anyone else. She wasn't going to let Veronica or anyone make her feel small anymore. As Maya approached, Veronica turned around, her sharp gaze falling on her. There was a flicker of recognition in Veronica's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the same coldness Maya had seen countless times before. Veronica raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Well, if it isn't the help," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. Maya stood still, her heart racing. She had been prepared for something like this, but it still stung. Veronica had made her feelings clear ever since that night, but Maya wasn't going to back down. "I'm not the help," Maya said quietly but firmly, her voice steady. "I'm Maya, and I deserve the same respect as anyone else in this house." Veronica's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. It was the first time she had heard Maya speak like that, without hesitation, without apology. The moment was charged with tension, but Maya held her ground. Veronica studied her for a moment, then let out a soft laugh, almost as if she found the whole situation amusing. "You think you've won something, don't you?" she said, her voice still condescending. "A few kind words from Jackson won't change anything." Maya felt her chest tighten, but she didn't let it show. "I'm not doing this for Jackson," she replied, her eyes locked with Veronica's. "I'm doing this for me. I'm not going to let anyone treat me like I'm invisible anymore." Veronica's face hardened, and for a moment, there was a cold silence between them. But then, to Maya's surprise, Veronica's expression softened, just slightly. "You have guts, I'll give you that," she said, her voice quieter now, almost contemplative. "But don't think this changes anything. The world still sees people like you the way I see you, nothing more than a maid." Maya felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Maybe the world is wrong," she said, her voice firm. "Maybe it's time for the world to see people like me differently." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without another word, Veronica turned and walked away. Maya watched her go, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the battle wasn't over. Veronica's words had stung, but they also had fueled something in her. She wasn't done fighting. She wasn't going to let anyone push her back into the shadows, not even Veronica. The world had seen Maya one way for so long, just a maid, just someone to be looked past. But Maya was done with that. She wasn't going to stay invisible any longer. As the days went by, Maya continued to stand her ground. Every time someone tried to belittle her, every time she was dismissed or treated like she didn't matter, she stood a little taller. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, that change would come slowly, but she had come too far to go back now. One afternoon, Jackson called Maya into his office again. This time, she wasn't nervous. She knew why he had asked to see her. When she entered, Jackson was sitting at his desk, his expression serious but warm. "Maya," he said, looking up at her with a smile, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've made an impact on this household, and I'm seeing changes in people. You've earned that respect, and you're starting to get the recognition you deserve." Maya felt a rush of emotion. She hadn't expected to hear this from him, but hearing it made everything feel worth it. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm starting to believe that things can really be different." Jackson nodded. "They can be, and you're part of making that happen." As Maya left his office, she felt a sense of pride she had never known before. She had earned her place in this world, and no one could take that away from her. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Maya knew that she could win it. As the days turned into weeks, Maya found herself becoming more comfortable with her new role. The mansion, once a place where she felt invisible and small, had become a space where she was starting to find her place, not just as the maid, but as a person who deserved respect. Jackson's words had made all the difference. They had given her the courage to stand tall, to assert herself in ways she never thought possible. But even as the environment around her began to change, Maya knew that not everyone would be so quick to accept the new order. Veronica, despite her softening in the last conversation, still carried the weight of her old beliefs. Maya knew that things weren't just going to magically change overnight. One evening, as Maya was finishing up her duties in the dining room, she overheard a conversation that made her freeze in her tracks. Veronica was talking to a few of the guests, her voice cold and sharp, though Maya could hear the strain in it. "I've tried to be understanding," Veronica said, "but this change in the house, it's not natural. People like her shouldn't be given such freedom." Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach as the words hit her ears. She wanted to turn and leave, not wanting to face any more judgment, but something inside her stopped her. She wasn't going to run away anymore. She was done with hiding. Veronica's voice grew louder. "Jackson is making a mistake. He doesn't understand that some people have their place, and it's not at the same table as us." Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood still, refusing to let the words hurt her. It wasn't easy, but she was learning. She wasn't just anyone. She was someone who had earned her place. As the conversation continued, Maya's thoughts raced. She knew what Veronica was trying to do. She was trying to create a divide, trying to make everyone see Maya as less than, as if she didn't deserve the respect she had earned. It was an old mindset, one that Maya refused to accept anymore. The thought of standing up to Veronica again made her nervous, but there was something different about this moment. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something bigger, something that would affect everyone who had ever been treated like she had been. Maya took a deep breath and walked into the room, her posture straight and her head held high. Veronica looked up, surprised at first, but then her expression quickly shifted to one of cold indifference. "Maya," she said, her tone clipped. "What are you doing here?" "I heard what you said," Maya said, her voice steady but firm. "And I want you to understand something. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to be treated like I'm invisible anymore, and neither should anyone else." Veronica narrowed her eyes, clearly irritated by Maya's words. "You think you're so important now, don't you?" she sneered. "You think this is going to last?" Maya didn't flinch. "It will last," she said, her voice unwavering. "Because it's not just about me. It's about every person who has been treated like they don't matter. It's about changing the way things have always been done." Veronica's eyes darkened, but Maya didn't back down. "You can keep trying to tear me down, but I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. "I won't let you make me feel small." Veronica opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stood there, staring at Maya, the weight of what had just been said hanging in the air. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. Maya stood her ground, refusing to let the fear that had plagued her for so long take over. She was done with fear. She was done with being told she wasn't good enough. Jackson's voice broke the silence as he entered the room, his eyes immediately locking with Maya's. "Is everything okay in here?" he asked, his tone calm but with an edge of concern. Veronica quickly regained her composure. "Everything is fine," she said coolly, her voice slipping back into its usual tone. "I was just having a conversation with Maya." Jackson looked from his mother to Maya, sensing the tension in the room. He could see the way Veronica's posture was rigid, how Maya's jaw was set in determination. "Maya," he said, his voice warm but firm. "I know you've been through a lot, and I appreciate your strength, but don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Maya met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. Jackson's support meant the world to her. Veronica, however, was still silent, her expression hardening as she looked at the both of them. Maya knew that this wasn't over. The struggle for respect and equality wasn't something that could be won in a single conversation, but she was ready to keep fighting. As Jackson turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Maya. "We'll make sure the changes stick," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "I promise." As Maya watched him walk away, she felt a deep sense of pride swell within her. For the first time in her life, she knew that the fight was worth it. No one could take away what she had earned, and no one could take away the respect she had fought so hard to gain. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Maya was no longer afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a turning point for Maya. The house, once a place of oppressive silence and dismissiveness, began to feel different. Not only was the staff beginning to change the way they treated her, but there was an undeniable shift in the overall atmosphere. The weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced with a subtle but powerful sense of recognition. Maya wasn't just doing her job anymore, she was part of the house. Her presence was acknowledged, and her worth was no longer measured by the apron she wore. But even as things changed for the better, Maya couldn't shake the tension that lingered. She knew Veronica still held on to her old views. She still carried the belief that certain people, no matter how capable or strong, should stay in their designated place. And while Jackson had made great strides in changing the environment, it was clear that Veronica's approval was still far from being fully earned. One evening, after a long day of working, Maya was sitting alone in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea when she heard the soft footsteps of someone entering. She didn't need to look up to know who it was, Jackson. He had been quiet these past few days, and she hadn't seen him as much as she had before. She wondered if he was facing any of the same challenges she was, trying to balance the respect he had started giving her with the pressure from his mother. "You seem deep in thought," Jackson said, his voice cutting through her contemplation. Maya smiled slightly, though it was tinged with a hint of concern. "Just thinking about everything," she replied softly. "It's been a lot to take in." Jackson nodded and took a seat across from her. "I understand," he said. "I've been doing some thinking too. About everything that's happened about you, about my mother, and the way things used to be. There's still a lot that needs to change." Maya glanced up, her eyes meeting his. "I know," she said. "I don't expect everything to change overnight. But I want to make sure the respect I've been given now stays. That it's not just something that fades with time." Jackson leaned forward, his gaze serious. "I promise you, Maya, it's not going away. I'm not going to let anyone take that away from you." Maya felt a sense of warmth in his words, but a part of her still hesitated. She had been hurt so many times before. She had been promised respect, only to have it stripped away as soon as it was convenient for others. But Jackson's sincerity in that moment made her believe that this time might be different. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft. "It means more than you know." Jackson smiled, his eyes softening. "You've earned it, all of it." Maya felt the weight of his words settle over her, a gentle affirmation of everything she had fought for. As the conversation turned to other topics, Maya couldn't help but notice that Jackson's presence in the house had become a beacon of change. His attitude had shifted toward everyone, and it was clear that he was no longer willing to accept the old ways. He had become an ally not just to her, but to anyone who had ever felt overlooked or disregarded. But even with Jackson's support, there was still the matter of Veronica. Maya knew that Jackson was doing what he could, but it would take more than just him to make sure the change was permanent. Veronica needed to see the value in what Maya had brought to the household. And she needed to understand that the respect Maya now had wasn't a privilege, but a right. One afternoon, a week later, Maya found herself alone in the sitting room, reading a book when Veronica walked in. Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she remained composed. She had faced Veronica's coldness before, and she wasn't about to let it rattle her now. Veronica stopped in front of her, her expression unreadable. "Maya," she said, her voice colder than usual. "Can we talk?" Maya nodded, setting the book down, her heart beating faster. "Of course." Veronica took a deep breath, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking about what you said to me that day," she started, her gaze never leaving Maya's. "And I've been thinking about the way I've treated you, and frankly, a lot of people. I've spent my whole life believing that people like you belong in certain places, but the truth is, I've been wrong." Maya's eyes widened in surprise. Veronica, admitting she was wrong, it was a shift Maya hadn't expected. "I know that respect doesn't come from a title, or a job, or a uniform," Veronica continued, her voice softer now. "It comes from how you treat others, and from acknowledging their worth. I haven't always done that, but I'm willing to change. Not just for you, but for everyone." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Maya wasn't sure what to say. She had never expected Veronica to come to this realization, but here she was, acknowledging the change that needed to happen, and for the first time, Maya believed that it wasn't just lip service. Veronica wasn't perfect, Maya knew that, but this was a step in the right direction. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice sincere. I appreciate you saying that. Veronica nodded, her eyes searching Maya's face. I won't make excuses for the past. But from here on out, you have my respect. And you will have it from everyone here. Maya's heart swelled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a major milestone. She had earned the respect she deserved, and no one could take that away from her. As Veronica left the room, Maya stood there for a moment, letting the gravity of the conversation sink in. She had fought for this moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone dim the light that had finally begun to shine on her. The change was palpable, not just in the house but in Maya herself. Every step she took seemed to carry a newfound sense of power, one she had never allowed herself to fully embrace before. She could feel the respect in the air now, from the staff, from the guests, and even from Veronica. The hard work she had put in, the courage to stand up for herself, was finally starting to bear fruit. But even as things shifted, the hardest test was yet to come. As the days went by, Maya had found herself becoming more and more a part of the household, her role not just as a maid, but as an individual with her own voice, her own space. She had even begun to attend some of the family gatherings, small meetings that took place in the large drawing room, where the family and their closest associates would discuss business. At first, she felt out of place, the only one not wearing a suit, but over time, she found herself contributing, speaking up, offering ideas when she was asked. Jackson had made sure that she was treated as an equal, and for the first time in her life, Maya was starting to believe it. But just as everything seemed to be coming together, an unexpected challenge emerged. One afternoon, a meeting took place at the mansion, and the room was filled with high-ranking executives and influential guests. Veronica was present as well, seated at the head of the table, her usual air of control and authority evident. Maya, as was becoming her routine, was quietly going about her duties, preparing refreshments for the attendees. She moved gracefully around the room, not looking for attention, just doing her job. But as she passed by the group, she overheard something that made her stop dead in her tracks. This whole arrangement with Maya, it's a distraction, one of the executives said, his voice low but cutting. It's disrupting the status quo. A woman like her, working in the household, no matter how well she's treated, is still not where she belongs. Maya froze, the tray in her hands suddenly feeling heavy. She knew this was coming. Deep down, she had always known that there would be those who would never accept the changes that were happening. But hearing the words spoken so plainly, in the very room she was working in, made something inside her snap. She had endured this kind of prejudice her entire life, but she wasn't going to let it control her anymore. She took a steadying breath and walked straight into the room, her eyes focused, her steps sure. The room fell silent as soon as she entered. All eyes turned toward her, but Maya didn't flinch. She met the gaze of the man who had spoken, holding his stare without hesitation. "You're wrong," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the room. "I belong here. I've earned my place, and I'm not going anywhere." The executive looked taken aback, his surprise quickly turning into defensiveness. "You're out of line," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just, I don't need your permission to exist in this space," Maya interrupted, her tone firm, but not disrespectful. "This isn't about my place or your approval. It's about the respect that every person deserves, no matter their job or their background." The room was still, but Maya could feel the shift. The discomfort, the tension, the challenge, it all hung in the air. But this time, it was different. The old Maya would have apologized, would have turned away, would have accepted the words and walked out, but not now, not anymore. Veronica, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, her voice surprisingly calm. "Maya is right," she said, her gaze meeting the man who had spoken. "We've all had to adjust to change, but the respect she deserves is non-negotiable." For a moment, the executive's face reddened, but he didn't speak again. He simply stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the others to look at each other, uncertain of what to make of the exchange. Jackson, who had been sitting silently in the corner, stood up and walked over to Maya. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small, proud smile. "You did great," he said quietly. Maya looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't know if I could stand up to him, but I had to." Jackson nodded. You don't have to apologize for standing your ground. You're not just here to serve. You're here because you matter. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. In that moment, she realized just how far she had come. She had found her voice, and it wasn't going anywhere. The respect that she had fought for was hers to keep, and anyone who didn't understand that would have to face the consequences. The room started to return to its usual hum, the moment of tension passing. But for Maya, something had shifted. She had faced her biggest challenge yet, and she had come out on top. And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed that the world was finally seeing her for who she was. Someone worthy, someone strong, someone who deserved to be heard. The next few days were a turning point for everyone. Maya walked through the mansion with a newfound sense of purpose, her shoulders squared, and her head held high. She knew things had changed, but now she was beginning to truly understand the extent of that change. The respect she had longed for, the one she had fought for with every ounce of her strength, was no longer something she had to chase. It was now something she had earned, and no one could take that away from her. But even as the winds of change blew through the house, the challenge was far from over. The respect Maya had gained was still being tested, not just by others, but by herself. She had never truly believed she would be accepted on this level, and now that it was happening, she wasn't sure how to fully embrace it. Veronica, who had softened in some ways, still looked at Maya with a mixture of suspicion and begrudging respect. Though the moments of open hostility had become rare, there was still an undercurrent of tension between them. Maya knew it wasn't going to be easy to change the mindset of someone who had lived with certain beliefs for so long, but she wasn't going to back down. One evening, as Maya was preparing dinner in the kitchen, she overheard Jackson speaking with his mother in the adjoining room. They were talking about the future of the household, about the way the business was expanding, and the role that family members would play moving forward. Maya couldn't help but listen, though she didn't mean to intrude. She had learned to be aware of the dynamics in the house, of the delicate balance between tradition and progress. "Mom, things are moving in a direction that we can't ignore," Jackson was saying. "The world is changing, and we need to change with it. Maya's role here is important, and we need to make sure that we're respecting that, not just for her, but for everyone." Veronica's response was calm, but there was an edge to her voice. "I understand that, Jackson," she said, her tone clipped, "but I don't know if you fully understand the implications of what you're asking. The way we've always done things isn't enough anymore," Jackson interrupted. "I'm not asking you to forget the past, but we can't move forward with the same mindset. Maya deserves to be here, and we need to make sure the rest of the world sees that." There was a pause, and Maya could almost feel the weight of the silence between them. "I've had a lot of time to think," Veronica said finally, her voice softer. "I see now that I've been too focused on what I believed was right. It's not easy to let go of that, but I'll try. For you, and for Maya." The words stung in ways Maya hadn't expected. Veronica's change wasn't just about Maya, it was about the way she saw the world, the way she saw herself. And in that moment, Maya realized that the battle wasn't just for her own dignity, it was for everyone who had been silenced and overlooked. Maya couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The respect she had fought for was no longer a personal victory. It was a victory for all those who had been told they didn't matter. Jackson had believed in her, had believed in the possibility of change, and now he was pushing forward to make it a reality. When the conversation ended, Maya stood there, her heart beating in her chest. She had been listening in on something incredibly personal, but it was a conversation she needed to hear. She needed to understand the weight of the change that was happening around her. It wasn't just about her being treated better, it was about a fundamental shift in how people, all people, were seen. As the days went by, Maya found herself standing taller, walking through the house with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. She no longer allowed the old whispers, the sideways glances, or the occasional sneers to define her. She wasn't just the maid. She was a woman who had earned her place, who had forced the world to see her for who she truly was. One evening, as the house settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Maya found herself alone in the library, going over some paperwork for the household's accounts. She was still adjusting to the new responsibilities that had been entrusted to her, and while it was daunting at times, it felt good to know that her input mattered. As she sat at the desk, the door opened softly, and she looked up to see Jackson standing there. "Got a minute?" he asked, a warm smile on his face. Maya smiled back and gestured for him to sit. "Of course," she said. Jackson pulled up a chair and sat across from her, looking at the papers spread across the desk. "I've been thinking about what you've been doing," he said, "about how much you've helped. You've really become a part of this house, and I want you to know that we're not just making these changes for you. We're making them for everyone who has been ignored, overlooked, or pushed aside." Maya felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't let it show. She had always believed that no one could change the way things were, that she would always be confined to the shadows. But now, as Jackson spoke, she realized that the world she had imagined for herself, one of respect, one where she was seen, was finally becoming real. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've never felt like this before. I've never felt like I belonged." Jackson smiled warmly. "You do now, and you always will." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. She had fought for this moment, for this life, and now she knew that she would never let anyone take it away from her. The future was hers, and she was ready to face it head on. The weeks passed, and Maya began to feel the weight of her own transformation. She had come a long way from the woman who once kept her head down and allowed herself to be invisible in the corners of the grand house. The respect she had fought for had not only been earned, but had become a cornerstone of her existence. Now, as she walked through the halls, it was impossible to ignore the subtle change in the air. People no longer glanced over her shoulder or treated her like she didn't matter. They saw her, truly saw her, for who she was. She wasn't just a maid, a servant, or an outsider. She was a part of this place, this family, and she wasn't leaving anytime soon. But despite the progress, Maya knew that the true test was yet to come. There would always be those who resisted change, those who clung to old beliefs, unwilling to accept the world as it was evolving. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maya sat in the living room, lost in thought. She was reflecting on how far she had come, but also what lay ahead. Change, she had learned, was never a one-time event, it was a process, and she was only halfway through. As she sat there, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. She turned, and there stood Jackson, his expression thoughtful. He had been busier lately, managing more of the estate's affairs, but tonight he seemed to be seeking her out. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice warm. Maya smiled and gestured for him to sit beside her. "Of course," she replied. Jackson took a seat, the warmth of his presence offering her a sense of calm. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, his gaze steady. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how far we've come and how much more there is to do." Maya looked at him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "I mean the whole situation. The way things are changing here, how people are starting to treat you differently. It's a good thing, Maya, a huge step forward. But we can't stop here. We need to keep pushing." Maya nodded. "I agree, but I feel like we've come so far already. I never imagined things would change this much." Jackson smiled. "That's the point, Maya. You've changed the way people see you, but now we need to keep changing the way they see everyone, how they see themselves." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I want to do more than just respect you. I want to help create a space where respect is the norm for everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from." Maya felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. "How do we do that?" she asked. Jackson leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with determination. "It's about leadership. It's about showing people what respect really looks like and leading by example. If I, as the head of this house, can show the way, others will follow. But we need more than just me. We need everyone to buy in." Maya considered his words carefully. She had always known the power of leadership, had seen how it could shape the way people interacted with each other. But she hadn't expected Jackson to be so determined to make lasting change. "So, what do we do next?" she asked, a sense of excitement building in her chest. Jackson smiled. "We start small. We talk to the staff. We talk to the people here. We create a culture of respect and inclusivity. It doesn't happen overnight, but I know we can make it happen. Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude for him in that moment. She had never imagined that someone with his power, his position, would be so committed to making the world a better place not just for her, but for everyone. It was a powerful reminder that change often begins with one person's willingness to stand up for what's right. "I'm in," Maya said, her voice firm. "Let's do this." The weeks that followed were marked by a renewed sense of purpose. Jackson and Maya worked side by side, reaching out to the staff, speaking to the family, and slowly changing the way people interacted with one another. The mansion, once a symbol of power and control, was beginning to feel more like a home, a place where respect was no longer just a formality but a shared value. Veronica, though resistant at first, was beginning to see the impact of Jackson's leadership. She had come a long way from the woman who had once seen Maya as nothing more than a servant. Veronica's grudging respect was slowly transforming into something more, something that could only be called understanding. One evening, as Maya was finishing up some work in the study, Veronica walked in. It was the first time in a long while that the two of them had been in the same space, without tension hanging in the air. Veronica paused at the doorway, and for a moment, there was a silence between them. Then, with a deep breath, Veronica spoke. "I see what you're doing," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "You and Jackson, you've changed things around here. I can't deny that. I may not have agreed with everything, but I'm starting to understand." Maya stood, surprised by the sincerity in Veronica's voice. "Thank you," she said softly. Veronica nodded, her expression still guarded, but there was something different in her eyes. "You deserve to be seen," she said quietly. "All of you do." It wasn't a perfect moment, and it wasn't a complete resolution, but in that moment, Maya understood something important. Change, real change, wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. And progress was something she was willing to fight for every day, in every room, in every relationship. As the sun set over the mansion, casting a golden light across the grounds, Maya stood by the window, looking out at the horizon. She had fought for this moment, and now, she was ready to continue the fight not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told they didn't matter. The battle wasn't over, but she knew she was on the right path. Weeks passed, and Maya could feel the change becoming permanent. It was no longer just a feeling of temporary respect. People had begun to look at her differently, not because she had forced it, but because her strength had made them see her as a person deserving of that respect. It was subtle, but it was there. When she entered a room, heads turned, not out of surprise, but out of acknowledgment. She wasn't just a part of the background anymore. She was seen, she was heard, and most importantly, she was valued. But as things progressed, there was still the looming presence of Veronica, a shadow that hung over the house. No matter how much things had improved, Maya knew that true respect would not come until Veronica fully understood the depth of change that needed to happen not just in the house, but in the way they treated everyone who walked through its doors. One evening, after the family had finished dinner, Jackson called Maya into his study. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was more business as usual, but when she entered, she saw a serious look on his face, one she hadn't seen in a while. He stood up when she walked in, and for a moment, there was only silence between them. Then Jackson spoke, his tone more somber than usual. "Maya, I've been thinking about the future, about everything that's changed here and everything we've been working toward. But there's something more we need to address." Maya sat down, sensing the gravity of his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady. "We've made progress, haven't we?" Jackson nodded, but his eyes were filled with concern. "Yes, we've made a lot of progress, but we both know that there are still some people who aren't fully on board with these changes. People who may never accept it, people who will continue to resist. The shift in the house is important, but the real change has to come from within. It's not just about us anymore." Maya listened closely, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She knew that Jackson wasn't just talking about her position in the house. He was talking about the future of the entire family. "I've had a conversation with my mother," Jackson continued, his voice low. "And I'm worried. She's struggling with the way things are changing. She says she understands, but I'm not sure if she truly does. We're going to need to confront that if we want to keep moving forward." Maya's stomach churned at the thought. Veronica had always been a powerful figure in the house, and it was clear that her approval or disapproval had a significant impact. If she didn't fully accept the changes, it could halt everything they had worked for. "What do you need me to do?" Maya asked, her voice firm despite the uncertainty inside. Jackson looked at her, his expression softening. "I need you to be ready," he said. "We need to have a difficult conversation with my mother. You've earned this place here, but if we're going to make this last, we need her to understand that this isn't just about her anymore. This is about what's right." Maya took a deep breath. She knew what that conversation would mean. Veronica had always been a woman of strong opinions, and challenging her directly was something few people had ever dared to do. But Maya wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had earned her right to speak her truth, to stand up for herself and for what she believed in. "I'll do it," Maya said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." The day of the conversation arrived sooner than Maya expected. She found herself standing in the grand hallway outside Veronica's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been through so much already, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making sure that the respect she had fought for would extend to everyone in the house, no matter their position. She knocked on the door, and Veronica's voice called out, "Come in." Maya stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. Veronica was sitting at her desk, her expression as cool and controlled as ever, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of curiosity, maybe even apprehension. "Maya," Veronica said, her voice neutral. "What's on your mind?" Maya took a deep breath and walked forward, standing tall. She wasn't going to let this moment pass. "I wanted to talk to you about the future of this household," she began, her voice steady, "about the changes that have been happening. I know we've had our differences, and I know you've had your own beliefs, but I need you to understand something." Veronica raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, though her expression remained unreadable. "Go on," she said. Maya held her gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. "This isn't just about me anymore. This is about all of us. About how we treat people, about how we see them, regardless of their job or their background. You've seen how things have shifted in the house. People are treating each other differently. They're respecting each other. But that change has to come from everyone, from you." Veronica's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Maya pressed on. "I've earned my place here. I've fought for it. But it's not just about me. It's about creating a space where everyone can be seen, where everyone can be treated with dignity. And I need you to understand that." There was a long silence. Maya stood there, waiting for Veronica to speak, her heart racing in her chest. Finally, Veronica spoke, her voice softer than it had been before. "You're right," she said, her words hesitant but sincere. "I've been holding on to old ways of thinking. I didn't want to let go of them. But I see now that things need to change." Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had done it. She had gotten through to Veronica, and with that, she knew that the foundation they had started to build was more solid than ever. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth fighting for, and Maya was ready. As she left Veronica's office, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced the hardest challenge yet, and she had come out stronger. The future was hers, and no one could take it away from her. The days following the conversation with Veronica were quiet, but Maya could feel a change, not just in the house, but in herself. She had done what she never thought possible. She had stood her ground, had spoken her truth, and had helped to build something that would last. The respect she had fought for was no longer just a personal victory, it had become a shared victory, one that was now part of the fabric of the household. People had begun to see each other differently, to treat each other with more kindness and understanding. The subtle barriers that once defined the boundaries of power and privilege were beginning to break down. There was still work to be done, but the foundation was now solid. Maya stood in the garden one evening, the sun setting in the distance, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. It had become her place of reflection, a space where she could clear her mind and take stock of how far she had come. She had always believed that change was impossible, that the world would always be as it had always been. But now, as she stood there, feeling the cool breeze on her face, she realized that change had come not overnight, but gradually, with persistence and courage. Jackson had kept his promise. He had been a constant ally, not just for her, but for the entire household. His leadership had created an environment where respect and dignity were no longer privileges, they were the norm. But it hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, moments when it seemed like things might fall apart. There were still people who resisted the change, who held on to their old ways of thinking. But the difference now was that there were more people willing to fight for what was right. People were beginning to speak up, to stand together. And Maya, for the first time in her life, felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore, she was working for a cause. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to see Jackson walking toward her, a smile on his face. "You're out here again," he said, his voice warm. Maya smiled back, feeling the weight of the moment. "Just thinking," she replied softly, "about everything that's changed." Jackson nodded, his gaze steady. "I know, it's been a long road, but we've come so far. You've been a huge part of that, Maya." Maya felt a swell of emotion. She had never imagined that she would hear those words from someone like Jackson. She had spent so many years believing that people like her didn't matter, that they were invisible. But now, standing here in this moment, she realized just how wrong she had been. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with gratitude, "for everything." Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression soft but filled with pride. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've earned everything you've got, and we're just getting started." Maya nodded, her heart full. The journey wasn't over, but she knew she was no longer fighting alone. There was a team behind her now, a family that understood the value of respect, of equality. She was part of something that was bigger than herself, something that would continue to grow and change long after she was gone. "I've learned a lot," Maya said, her voice steady. "I've learned that it's not about waiting for change to happen. It's about making it happen." Jackson smiled, his eyes reflecting the same conviction that Maya now felt deep within her. "Exactly. And you've been leading the way." The two of them stood there for a moment, watching the sunset together, the peaceful silence wrapping around them. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one where anything was possible. For the first time in her life, Maya felt a deep sense of belonging. She wasn't just a part of the house, she was a part of the change that had reshaped it. And that was something she would never take for granted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to fight for herself, for others, and for the world she knew was possible. A world where respect, dignity, and equality weren't just ideals, they were lived truths. And she would be at the forefront of making that world a reality. In this compelling narrative, we delve into the transformation of a strong Black woman who rises from the shadows of invisibility and fights for respect, dignity, and equality in a world that often overlooks people of her background. Through a series of struggles and triumphs, her journey exemplifies the power of resilience and self-worth, themes that resonate strongly in many Black stories. As Maya learns to stand tall and demand respect, she challenges not only societal expectations but also the deep-rooted biases that threaten to hold her back. Her story is one of empowerment, a beacon for others who may feel trapped in a world where their voices are ignored. As Maya grows stronger and more confident, she earns the acknowledgment she deserves, reminding us all that every person, no matter their background, deserves to be seen and heard. This is one of the powerful Black stories that highlight the ongoing fight for equality, showing that change can only happen when individuals take a stand against injustice. Maya's journey also reflects the broader challenges faced by Black people in society, and her courage to continue pushing for fairness serves as an inspiration to others. In this tale of change and determination, the importance of unity and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths is clear, making it one of the most impactful Black stories of our time. As Maya's life unfolds, she becomes part of a movement toward a world where people are judged not by their job or their skin color but by their integrity and character. These Black stories are a testament to the strength and courage of individuals who fight for what they believe in, no matter the odds.